My name's Chris, and my wife is named Jennifer. We've been married for 7 years, and I always thought we had a solid, loving relationship. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a charming little town in Pennsylvania. Our house is modest but cozy, surrounded by a neatly kept yard and a white picket fence, the kind of place you might see in a postcard. We don't have any kids, which was a mutual decision, at least for now. We both have good jobs. I'm an accountant at a local firm, and Jennifer works as a project manager for a marketing company. Our life seemed like a picture of normalcy and stability. Weekends were spent gardening, having barbecues with our friends, or taking short trips to nearby attractions. Jennifer and I enjoyed our time together, and I never imagined that anything could come between us. But as it turns out, I was living in a fool's paradise. Lately, though, I've noticed some unsettling changes in Jennifer's behavior. At first, I brushed them off as stress from work or just a phase. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I started seeing small cracks in the facade of our seemingly perfect life, and those cracks were only going to get bigger. It all began with little things, the kind of changes you might not notice if you're not looking for them. Jennifer started spending more time at work, often coming home late and looking exhausted. She claimed it was because of a big project with tight deadlines, but something about her explanations felt off. She was constantly glued to her phone, quickly swiping away messages or turning the screen off whenever I walked into the room. One evening, I noticed she was texting someone late into the night, a smile playing on her lips. When I asked who she was talking to, she brushed it off with a vague answer about it being a colleague from work. "Just discussing some last-minute details for tomorrow's meeting," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Our sex life, which had always been active and satisfying, dwindled to almost nothing. She seemed distant, often making excuses about being too tired or not feeling well. I tried to be understanding, attributing it to stress, but the growing coldness between us was hard to ignore. Then there were the weekends. Jennifer used to cherish our time together, but now she seemed to have an endless list of errands and activities that kept her out of the house. She'd mentioned meeting up with old friends I'd never heard of before, or attending some impromptu work function. When I'd suggest joining her, she'd quickly dismiss the idea, saying it was just a boring work thing, or that I wouldn't enjoy myself. I began to notice a shift in her appearance, too. Jennifer had always taken care of herself, but now she seemed to be putting in extra effort. She bought new clothes, spent more time doing her hair and makeup, and even started going to the gym more frequently. When I complimented her on how great she looked, she'd give me a quick smile and a distracted "thanks," as if her mind was somewhere else. One Saturday afternoon, while cleaning up around the house, I found a receipt for an expensive dinner for two at a fancy restaurant downtown. The date on the receipt was from a night she had told me she was working late. My heart sank, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was starting to pile up. I tried to push my suspicions aside, to believe that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. The more I observed Jennifer's behavior, the more convinced I became that she was hiding something from me. The final straw came when I overheard a phone conversation late one night. Jennifer was in the kitchen, her voice low and conspiratorial. I couldn't make out all the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was talking to someone in a way that was far too intimate for a colleague or a friend. My blood ran cold as I heard her laugh softly and say, "I can't wait to see you again." At that moment, my suspicions solidified into certainty. My wife was having an affair. After that night, I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I needed proof, something undeniable. The idea of hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but I decided to take matters into my own hands first. Jennifer's patterns had become predictable: working late, mysterious phone calls, and weekend disappearances. I began paying closer attention to her schedule, noting the days when she seemed most evasive. One Friday evening, Jennifer told me she had a work dinner with her team. She was wearing a new dress, one I'd never seen before, and she looked stunning. My gut told me this was it. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her. Keeping a safe distance, I tailed her car downtown. She parked near an upscale restaurant, one of those places you go to impress someone. As she walked in, my heart pounded in my chest. I parked a few spots away, took a deep breath, and followed her inside. trying to keep my presence unnoticed. I scanned the restaurant and quickly spotted her. She was sitting at a table near the back, but she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her, holding her hand and gazing into her eyes, was a man I didn't recognize. He was well-dressed, handsome, and clearly very comfortable with my wife. I felt a rush of anger and betrayal, but I held back, watching as they talked and laughed, oblivious to the world around them. Then, as if to confirm my worst fears, he leaned across the table, and they kissed, deeply and passionately. It was more than I could bear. Without thinking, I stormed over to their table. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock as she saw me approaching, but it was too late. My fury had taken over. With a force fueled by raw emotion, I flipped their table over, sending glasses, plates, and cutlery crashing to the floor. The restaurant fell silent, and all eyes were on us. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the stunned restaurant. Jennifer looked up at me, her face pale. The man stood up, trying to shield her, but I was too quick. I swung my fist, connecting squarely with his jaw. He stumbled back, crashing into a nearby table, the diners there scrambling to get out of the way. "Chris, stop!" Jennifer screamed, but I wasn't listening. I grabbed the man by his collar, ready to hit him again, but the restaurant staff quickly intervened, pulling me away. "Get out of here, both of you!" the manager shouted, pointing towards the exit. Breathing heavily, I let them drag me out, my knuckles throbbing from the punch. Jennifer followed, her face a mixture of fear, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite place. Once outside, the cold night air hit me, but it did nothing to cool my anger. "How could you, Jennifer?" I spat, my voice trembling. "After everything we've been through, how could you do this to me?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The man, nursing his jaw, stood off to the side, wisely keeping his distance. I turned to him, pointing a finger. "Stay away from my wife, or I swear, next time you won't get off so easy." With that, I turned and walked away, not looking back. The sound of Jennifer's sobs and the murmurs of the restaurant's patrons faded into the background as I made my way to my car. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, hurt, betrayal. I had caught them red-handed, and now there was no denying the truth. As I drove home, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My marriage was shattered, my trust obliterated. The woman I thought I knew had been living a lie, and now I had to face the consequences of that painful truth. When I got home, I felt a mix of rage and sorrow so intense that it was almost paralyzing. I paced around the living room, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and deceit. The house, which once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed tainted by Jennifer's lies. The memories of happier times felt like cruel jokes in light of what I had just witnessed. It wasn't long before Jennifer arrived. She walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked at me, and for a moment, there was only silence between us, an uncomfortable, suffocating silence. "Chris, she began, her voice trembling, but I cut her off. "Save it, Jennifer," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I don't want to hear your excuses." She stood there, wringing her hands, looking small and defeated. "I'm sorry, Chris. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Sorry?" I spat, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I had spent too long holding back my suspicions and doubts, and now it was all coming out. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" She took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started out as just talking, but then things got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I echoed, incredulous. "That's your explanation? You expect me to believe that it just happened? You planned this, Jennifer. You lied to my face over and over." "I'm so sorry," she said again, but it meant nothing. Her apologies were hollow, empty words that couldn't undo the damage she had done. I took a step closer, my anger radiating off me. "I want you out, Jennifer. Pack your things and leave. I can't stand to look at you right now." Her eyes widened in shock. "Chris, please, don't do this. We can talk about this. We can work through it." "Work through it?" I laughed bitterly. "There's nothing left to work through. You broke us, Jennifer. You broke us beyond repair. She started to protest, but I held up my hand to stop her. Go! Pack your things and get out. I can't have you here. For a moment, she just stood there, as if hoping I would change my mind. But when she saw the determination in my eyes, she finally relented. She turned and walked upstairs to pack her things, her footsteps heavy with defeat. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to process everything that had just happened. The reality of my decision was sinking in, and it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. But I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't live with the constant reminder of her betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, Jennifer came back downstairs carrying a suitcase. She looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading for forgiveness that I couldn't give. Goodbye, Chris, she said softly, and then she was gone. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had stood, trying to come to terms with the fact that my life had just been irrevocably changed. The house was eerily quiet after Jennifer left. Her absence was a gaping hole in my life, one that I wasn't sure how to fill. But in the stillness of those first few hours, a new emotion began to simmer beneath my grief. Anger. Not just anger, but a seething rage that demanded action. I couldn't just let her walk away with nothing but a suitcase. She needed to understand the gravity of what she had done, the depth of the betrayal she had inflicted, and I wanted her lover, that smug bastard, to feel it too. The next day, I began to plan. I needed to confront Jennifer's lover, to show him that there were consequences for his actions. I knew where he worked. Jennifer had mentioned it in passing enough times for me to piece it together. He was a course instructor at a local community college, teaching night classes a few times a week. I waited until the following Wednesday, one of the nights he was scheduled to teach. I arrived at the campus early, parking my car in a spot where I could see the entrance to the building. I watched as students filed in, and then I saw him, tall, confident, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I waited until his class started, giving him time to settle in. Then I made my way to the classroom. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was firm. This was something I needed to do. I pushed open the door, and the room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. He looked up, a puzzled expression on his face that quickly turned to recognition and then fear. He knew who I was. "You!" I shouted, pointing at him. "You think you can just walk into my life and destroy it? You think you can take what isn't yours and get away with it?" The students looked around, confused and scared, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about making him feel a fraction of the humiliation and pain he had caused me. He stood up, trying to placate me with his hands raised. "Chris, listen, I can explain," but I wasn't interested in explanations. I stormed up to him, my fists clenched. "Explain? You think there's an explanation that makes this okay?" Before he could respond, I grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. The look of fear in his eyes was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I threw him back against the desk, sending papers and books flying. "You ruined my marriage!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the room. "You ruined my life!" He tried to get up, but I was on him again, my fist connecting with his face. He fell back, blood trickling from his nose. The students screamed, some of them running out of the room to get help. It wasn't long before campus security arrived, pulling me off him. I didn't resist. I had done what I came to do. As they dragged me away, I looked back at him, a crumpled, bleeding mess on the floor. It was a small victory, but it felt good to see him suffer. The aftermath was a blur. The police were called, and I was taken to the station. I spent the night in a holding cell, my anger slowly giving way to exhaustion and regret. By morning, they released me with a warning, and I walked out into the daylight, feeling strangely lighter. News of the confrontation spread quickly. Jennifer called me that afternoon, her voice frantic and furious. "What the hell did you do, Chris? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" "I know exactly how much trouble I've caused," I replied coldly. "And it's nothing compared to what you did to me." She started to say something else, but I hung up. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her attempts to shift the blame. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was time to move on. But moving on wasn't going to be easy. The house was still filled with reminders of Jennifer, of the life we had built together. I knew I needed to take more steps to reclaim my life, to find some semblance of peace after the storm. The days following the confrontation were tumultuous. I was exhausted, not just from the physical altercation, but from the emotional upheaval that seemed to drain every ounce of my strength. I knew I needed to take further steps to protect myself and to move forward. The first step was legal action. I contacted a divorce lawyer recommended by a friend. When I walked into the office, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. This was the beginning of the end, and I was finally taking control of my future. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was a seasoned professional. He listened patiently as I recounted the events leading up to Jennifer's betrayal and the subsequent confrontation. He took detailed notes, nodding occasionally, and then outlined the process for filing for divorce and seeking a fair division of assets. Given the circumstances, he said, we have a strong case for infidelity, which will work in your favor. We can also request that she not receive any spousal support, considering her actions. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. What about the house? I asked. I don't want to lose it. It's one of the few things I have left. We'll fight for that, Mr. Thompson assured me. But be prepared for a battle. These things can get messy, especially when emotions are involved. With the legal process set in motion, I felt a small sense of empowerment. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. Have a final conversation with Jennifer. I needed closure, and I needed to make it clear that there was no turning back. I called Jennifer and asked her to meet me at a nearby park, a neutral place where we could talk without the ghosts of our home haunting us. She agreed, sounding hesitant but willing to face me. We met the next day, sitting on a bench overlooking a small pond. The weather was calm, in stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. Jennifer looked worn, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a wary tension. Chris, she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. Let me speak first, I said. I've already filed for divorce. This is happening, Jennifer. There's no going back. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I know, Chris, and I understand. I wish things had been different. Different how? I asked, my voice steady but firm. You made a choice, Jennifer. You chose to betray me, to lie to me. This isn't something that just happened to us. You did this. She looked down, tears streaming down her face. I was lonely, she whispered. You were always working, always busy. I felt like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. That's bullshit, Jennifer, I snapped. I worked hard to provide for us, to give us a good life. And you repay me by screwing some guy behind my back? That's not loneliness. That's selfishness. She flinched at my words but didn't argue. I'm sorry, Chris. Truly, I am. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand, but please don't take everything away from me. We can find a way to split things fairly. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my anger. I'll let the lawyers handle that, I said finally. But make no mistake, Jennifer. This is the end. We're done. She nodded again, wiping her tears. I understand. I just hope someday you can forgive me. Forgiveness? I laughed bitterly. That's a long way off, Jennifer. Right now, I just need to move on. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. Then, without another word, I stood up and walked away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The legal proceedings moved quickly. With the evidence of Jennifer's infidelity and the confrontation well documented, our divorce was finalized within a few months. I kept the house, as Mr. Thompson had promised, and I was granted a fair division of our assets. Jennifer didn't fight it, perhaps out of a sense of guilt, or perhaps because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. In the end, the legal action provided a sense of closure, a way to draw a line under the past and look forward to the future. But it wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self. And as I signed the final papers, I felt a sense of freedom and possibility that I hadn't felt in years. The weeks after the divorce felt like stepping into a new world. The house, once filled with memories of Jennifer, now felt like a blank slate. I spent time redecorating, changing things around, making it mine. I painted the walls new colors, got rid of furniture that held too many memories, and bought new pieces that suited my taste. It was therapeutic, a way to reclaim my space and my life. One Saturday, I decided to go through our old photos and mementos. It was a painful but necessary process. I kept a few pictures that reminded me of good times, but most of them went into a box that I eventually took to storage. I needed to create a future, unburdened by the past. My friends rallied around me during this time. They dragged me out to bars, introduced me to new people, and encouraged me to try new activities. I started going to the gym regularly, something I had neglected during the marriage. Working out became a way to release the pent-up anger and frustration, and it felt good to focus on my physical health. One evening, my friend Mark invited me to join a hiking group. "It's a great way to clear your mind," he said. I was hesitant at first, but I decided to give it a shot. The first hike was challenging, but the sense of accomplishment I felt at the end was invigorating. I began to look forward to those hikes, the fresh air, and the camaraderie with the group. During one of these hikes, I met Emily. She was part of the group, a warm, friendly woman with a quick smile and an infectious laugh. We hit it off immediately, talking about everything from our favorite movies to our shared love of the outdoors. There was an ease to our conversations that felt refreshing. Emily and I started spending more time together outside of the hiking group. We went for coffee, had dinners, and even took a few day trips to nearby towns. She was understanding and patient, never pushing me to talk about my past, but always ready to listen when I needed to. For the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine connection with someone. One evening, as we sat on my newly redecorated patio watching the sunset, Emily turned to me and said, "You know, Chris, you've come a long way since we first met. I'm really proud of you." Her words touched me deeply. I realized that through all the pain and upheaval, I had found a sense of strength and resilience I didn't know I had. "Thanks, Emily," I said, smiling. "I couldn't have done it without the support of friends like you." As the months went by, my relationship with Emily blossomed. We took things slow, both of us cautious after past hurts, but there was a trust and a respect that grew between us. She brought a sense of joy and lightness into my life that I hadn't felt in years. Reflecting on the journey I'd been through, I realized that Jennifer's betrayal, as painful as it was, had led me to a place of growth and self-discovery. I had learned to stand up for myself, to fight for my happiness, and to let go of what no longer served me. I discovered a new sense of independence and found new passions and interests that enriched my life. One evening, as Emily and I sat together, I told her about my plans for the future. "I want to travel," I said. "I've always dreamed of seeing the world, and I think it's time I start making those dreams a reality." Emily's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing, Chris. I'd love to travel with you, if you'll have me." We began planning trips together, starting with small weekend getaways and gradually expanding to more adventurous destinations. Our shared experiences brought us even closer, and I felt a renewed sense of excitement for the future. Through it all, I stayed in touch with my friends and family, leaning on them when needed and offering support in return. My parents, who had been my rock throughout the divorce, were thrilled to see me happy again. My friends, who had seen me at my lowest, celebrated my new beginning with me. Life after Jennifer was not without its challenges, but it was also filled with unexpected joys and new opportunities. I had learned to trust myself, to value my worth, and to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. As I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had survived the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever came next. With Emily by my side and a world of adventures waiting, I knew that the best was yet to come.